Here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to Fox 10 Talks on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm Brian Webb with Trenton Hooker. Love for you to join us and comment on YouTube if you'd like. We have lots to talk about, of course, local, national, international news. I guess there are only local stories now. Somehow it relates to all of us.
Yeah.
We want to touch on Iran today as well as what's going on in Venezuela.
2026, a hell of a year already, right? Kicking off. But what's happening in Iran, I think everybody have their eyes on what's going to happen. Of course, the protests are really the largest since the overthrow of that country in 1979, the Ayatollah installed. But we have a very special guest we're going to get to right away. Hal Kempfer, retired Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Marine Corps and global security expert. Hal, good to talk to you. But as you're watching what's happening in Iran, what's your takeaway for how the U.S. proceeds in what's becoming a really tenuous situation?
Well, Trenton, if you'd asked me that about an hour and a half ago, I'd say we're at the precipice of U.S. military strikes. Everything seemed to be going that direction. Iran kind of ramped things up this morning by saying publicly that they want to assassinate President Trump. That's a pretty strong comment to make publicly. And the reports were out that anywhere from 12,000 plus Iranians had been killed by the usually the more zealous security forces tied to the regime. And then all of a sudden it came back. President Trump said, no, they've stopped the killing, and that the executions that were scheduled for within a few hours were not going to proceed or go forward, at least not within that time period, which looks like a bit of an off-ramp towards military strikes. But military strikes are very much on the table as a possibility. We've been evacuating military personnel from our big air base in Qatar, Al Udeid, the one that was hit, if you recall, last June in retaliation for the B-2 strike. So to say things are tense is a bit of an understatement, but the regime is in an absolute predicament. They've got nowhere to go. I just don't see how they're going to get out of this without either a major change in their organizational structure, or it simply gets overthrown altogether.
Before we get to that, Hal, talk to me about the capabilities of Iran. I'm trying to think back. We have struck them on some level fairly recently, right? And nothing came of it from their side. Are they capable really of striking us back or killing our president, much less?
Well, Brian, killing our president would be a tough one. I don't rule it out. And they've been caught with a number of plots to do assassinations here in the U.S. before. You may recall that they were going after former Trump officials. They also have gone after dissidents overseas, to include a very prominent Iranian dissident in New York City. So that is in the cards for them to do that stuff. To kill the president of the United States, to assassinate him, that really is kind of rhetorical flourish. It should be very difficult for them to do, period, let alone to do in short order, let alone to do when it's in the public space that they say they're doing it. So it is more of a threat than it's more of a verbal threat than an actual physical threat, although I don't doubt that the Secret Service is taking it very seriously, as is everybody else. But as far as what Iran can do, they can launch missiles. They have missiles, and since the June attacks and today, we have seen where the Houthis have been able to launch some of these, what they call hypersonic missiles, very fast-moving missiles, and get through the Iron Dome into Israeli territory, which is another way of saying they could probably get through whatever air defenses we have in the Gulf as well, which we have about 65,000 U.S. military personnel in the Middle East, most of them around the Persian Gulf area, at various different bases up and down the Gulf. And so all of those personnel, all those bases, all those U.S. facilities, all the U.S. industrial facilities. We have a pretty big footprint over there, particularly in the world of oil and gas. All of those things would be potential targets that they could hit with either missiles or drones. That's the two big things. They could also clog up the Strait of Hormuz with maritime actions. I think eventually we'd take out whatever they put there, but it is disruptive to say the least.
Hal, I want to go back to the summer with Operation Midnight Hammer, those strikes that the Trump administration ordered against Iran's nuclear facilities. Now that the dust has settled a little bit on that, do we know the state of their nuclear program, especially when it comes to enriching uranium and ultimately creating a nuclear weapon potentially?
Well, of course, it came out afterwards. They said, oh, we hadn't really destroyed all their nuclear capability. They had a lot of stuff that was elsewhere. And it got very political back and forth as to where those strikes were successful. The strikes themselves, by any military measurement, were very successful. They went in, they hit those things. I have to tell you that the B-2 strike, where they dropped the bombs, they dropped initial bombs down the air shaft. That was something out of Star Wars. I was stunned with how well that went, and hit that underground facility with these amazing bunker buster bombs that we have. That was very effective, as was the Tomahawk missile strikes against the other sites. However, did they hit all the sites? That's a big question. It is presumed that they have other facilities. It is presumed that they may have nuclear material that were not hit. And there was a report going out about a month ago that they might be trying to build what they called mini nukes, which was very small nuclear devices, which could have been possibly a mistranslation or a misinterpretation. Maybe not full nuclear weapons, but they might have been trying to build dirty bombs and to do something like that. So I don't rule any of that out, but they do have a capability, and I wouldn't say they're completely done with everything they're doing there. Sorry about that.
Hal, tell me about, do we have back channel communications with a country like Iran, and are there people on the phone trying to de-escalate, or how does that work out? Like, I wouldn't threaten President Trump anymore if I were you, or I would, I mean, how hard line do they go, or they bring in the soft sell? Hey guys, maybe we don't want to go down this road. How's that work?
We have communications with them. We can, one thing, even though we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran, we don't have embassies. They do have an embassy in the United States. It's at the United Nations. And so we literally can have our UN ambassador go over and talk to their UN ambassador, and we could have a conversation there. So there are ways to talk. The other way I think that the communication is going back and forth is Saudi Arabia might be acting as an interlocutor. We have obviously outstanding relations with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia today went to great pains to make sure that Iran knew that no U.S. Attacks, no U.S. overflights, nothing would go through Saudi Arabian airspace. That was something they were very clear about. That they were making that statement tells me that they are in direct communication with the Iranians. You may recall that a couple of years ago, they had reestablished diplomatic relations with each other after stopping diplomatic relations. So there is communication going on there. There's a lot of ways that we can talk to the Iranians. And then, of course, there's a number of venues in Europe that we can talk to them as well.
Hal, I want to ask, too, where, of course, this is changing every minute on the ground there in Iran. What is the threat right now to neighboring countries, especially Israel, with the situation there? Of course, no love lost between Iran and Israel for quite some time. But is there a threat as the Ayatollah's power, as the mullahs are losing kind of control there on what's happening, that there might be an attack on Israel and then leading to a larger regional conflict?
Well, if we attack Iran has made it pretty clear that they will attack Israel. They do not see any space there. Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago when Bibi Netanyahu came over to Washington, D.C., the reports were that he met with President Trump, and President Trump told him at that time, do not attack Iran. That's what Netanyahu wanted to do. He said, look, they got these missile sites, these missiles we got to take out. They're trying to recharge their nuclear program, and we want to go in there and take them out. And President Trump at that time said, don't do it. All you're going to do is get everybody rallying around the flag. You're going to create more support for a regime that's in a very tenuous position. And if you can hold off, things might change. I would say if you look at the protests going on all around Iran, that's a way of saying things have changed dramatically. One of the things we have to be concerned about, especially if we did something in concert with the Israelis, were that what the protesters are protesting about could be undermined by people saying, oh my gosh, we're under attack from these outside countries. And everybody starts rallying around this regime that most Iranians would love to get rid of. So we got to be very careful, but they do see the U.S. and Israel pretty much in the same context. So that they would probably do retaliatory strikes over there. Would they do preemptive strikes? Would they strike them for no reason because they think the regime is falling apart? That's a very distinct possibility. I just haven't heard that as one of the things that are out there. Of course, we won't know. It's not something they're going to advertise because the Iranian regime is not going to turn around and say, oh, that's it, we're falling apart, we're going to attack Israel. They will simply just fall apart and probably launch an attack if they were to do something like that.
If that were to happen, what's the next regime look like? Is it just as bad as the one we have now, or do we end up running Iran like we're running Venezuela, supposedly?
Well, I think it was yesterday that President Trump said, I am the acting president of Venezuela. I find all this rhetoric very interesting at times, considering we have zero presence on the ground, but it is interesting to hear that. But I don't know what it'll look like. There's been a lot of discussion about that. Is it possible the Ayatollah and maybe the Supreme Council that he's in charge of, that very religious, theocratic, autocratic organization, is it possible that they could be taken out of the equation, and maybe the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, maybe that they could be stood down or disbanded or something like that? These are all distinct possibilities, assuming there's a rational actor that's within the current governmental structure that would be willing to make these decisions. And of course, to do so, certainly that's a risk of, dare I say, suicide, because the likelihood that they would try to take that person out, or those persons out that were trying to get rid of that theocratic element of the regime. That is the essence of what this regime is about. It was, an Islamic revolution that they were fomenting in '79. So that is kind of their identity as a whole. Now, I will say this, there is a possibility, and it's always been discussed, that the less zealous, less religiously oriented regular military, all right, and the regular police force, not the religious police, not the Revolutionary Guard Corps, could hit a point where they say enough is enough and turn on the Revolutionary Guard. If 12,000 Iranians have been killed in the streets, or if it's even more than 12,000, inevitably that would probably include, their relatives, friends, others, family.
Hal, we're coming up on a hard break right here, if we can. But if you can hang with us for just 2 minutes, we're going to come back and let's talk Venezuela. You're watching Fox 10 Talks. We're having a fascinating discussion today with Hal Kempfer. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, U.S. Marine Corps, and a global security expert. Hal, we just wrapped up talking about Iran, but let's move to what's happening in the Caribbean and also in Venezuela. There was a new report that came out this week from the New York Times talking about an allegation that the Pentagon in September during one of these drug boat strikes may have disguised military aircraft to look like a civilian aircraft in that operation. What's your read about what may have happened?
Well, my read is I don't believe the Pentagon has verified that in any way, shape, or form, nor the administration has verified that that was the case. It's just an allegation was out there. A couple of things. I think they were saying the aircraft may have been gray. I've seen a lot of aircraft, military aircraft that are gray that have very subdued military markings or aircraft markings on them. There's a reason why they're subdued. We don't want the enemy to really see them. So they tend to keep them, a lot of times they'll be painted in black or very, very, very dark gray on a gray background or something like that. They're not hiding, but they are intentionally disguised or intentionally downplayed so they don't stand out. So you can't see them not to hide what the aircraft is simply to hide the fact, it's war. You don't want the enemy to see you. So that's part of why it's there. Now, as far as what was accused there, now, yes, we've had CIA operations over there. They have a variety of aircraft. So the question is, what could have been an aircraft that was not a standard military aircraft? Could have been possible. That would be a violation of the international law of war. And it's called perfidy, which is you're just deliberately disguising something to look like something it's not. And that's a violation of international law. That's something I was taught in the law of war course at the Naval War College way back when. That's something that we're not supposed to do. And of course, if we do it, that opens up attacks to all of our civilian aircraft and all our civilian ships, et cetera, simply because the enemy wouldn't know if they're military or not.
Yeah, Hal, I just was mulling over that answer. I mean, what's the purpose there? I mean, they're not going to be able to really stop us, even if we're clearly in a military plane making these attacks, right? We could be waving an American flag out the window. What would they be able to do to stop us?
There's nothing gained by us hiding that. Now, it could have been simply a case they looked up in the sky, you see a gray aircraft. I can tell you that we paint our aircraft to blend in with the sky. That's kind of the idea of camouflage, all right? So we do that, and they could have looked in the sky, and they could not have been able to tell the markings on them, or the markings could have been subdued in such a way that, again, they're there, but for a casual observer, they may not be able to easily discern them. They're not going to stand out like markings on standard regular civilian aircraft where you clearly see the tail number painted on, and if there's anything else, you'll see it painted on. Military aircraft tend to be very subdued colors as it is, and we do have a number of aircraft that are what we call dual use. They're civilian, but they also are used for military purposes. I'm assuming they saw one that's used for civilian purposes that was, basically color or painted in such a way that it was somewhat camouflage, difficult to observe, and they may have just assumed that they couldn't have seen markings on it. That's a more likely scenario because we don't normally put anti-ship missiles on any aircraft that would not be properly marked. That just wouldn't make sense, and there's nothing gained from it.
Right. Fascinating discussion, as always. Hal Kempfer, we appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon.
All right. Thanks, Trenton.
See you next time.
Brian.
All right.
Take
We'll
care.
see you. Thank you. All right. Let's move on. Now, the award-winning Fox 10 series Aftermath is returning tonight. And we have Fox 10 investigator Justin Lum joining us in just a moment. But let's take a look at this series return with some stories of heartache and pain as these families are searching for justice.
911, where is your emergency?
No one says how hard it's gonna be. You don't know until you lose your kid. So every day you just wake up there's a hole in your heart.
Every cold case has its own challenges. We have 3 full-time homicide cold case detectives. A lot of times these cases go on for years.
People stop calling. Life goes on. You're just stuck. As a homicide detective, this is one of those cases that keeps me up at night. No one has come forward to report what they saw.
There's not a day or an hour that goes by that I don't think about Amp.
We know somebody out there has information that can tell us exactly what took place that night.
My heart shattered. That's the day I actually felt what a broken heart was.
We're determined to find justice.
Yeah, when she said there toward the end, now I know what a broken heart is. Like we can empathize with these people, but man, you can't know what they're going through until you're in their shoes.
And I believe, thanks guys for having me. First of all, proud to unveil season 2, and you may recognize some of these stories, unsolved murders here in Phoenix. I believe the one case, the mother you're talking about, you covered that case.
Yeah, I remember that.
Desiree Rivas, 17-year-old cheerleader from Cesar Chavez, and I had never gotten the chance to speak to her mother or her father, and I'd always try to connect via Facebook or social media. And then later, as we started the first season of Aftermath and followed 3 other families, I thought, well, for the next time we do this, that's a family that I'd like to meet. And so to go into Desiree's bedroom and see, her bed and her clothes and makeup and just everything, it seems untouched. It's very, very powerful. And for her mother to talk about how she spent Mother's Day weekend in 2023, just saddening. And so there really aren't any leads there. 150 or so partygoers at that house party she was shot at, and no one has come forward to really give some legitimate information. It's very, very tragic. And we have 2 other cases that we're profiling that we can get into as we converse about this. But I think we just want to show people how these families navigate grief, especially when they're not getting any answers.
Yeah. One thing I always love about watching Aftermath is how you do just go so deep with the victims, with their story, where when we watch a traditional true crime docuseries as it's being laid out, it's usually the default that we're hearing from the investigators about how they piece the clues together, the murder mystery, but the victims themselves are usually just the background dressing of what's happening. Yeah. But in your story, in the way that you're able to lay the series out, we're walking through the worst moments of their life, of course, but then we're seeing what they have to do to keep trying to find answers. And, sometimes in many of these cases, there's not an answer yet. As they're trying to find it.
It takes a lot of patience on their part, and for them to be vulnerable and give us that trust to let us into their homes, to go to the cemetery with them, to go back to the scene of the crime. And you can imagine what that feels like for that mother, for that father to go step on the grounds that they lost their son or their daughter, whoever it is. But I think it's important to talk to the detectives. In every one of these cases, we ask Phoenix PD, can we talk to the lead detective on this case? And if they are provided, then great, we can really get into the details of the case. But I think at the forefront, it is speaking to these family members and taking us into the locations that matter. So scene of the crime, where something, following them on a mission, whereas one of these mothers puts up flyers at the club where her son was shot and killed. Every year she flies from Seattle, Washington to Phoenix just for this trip. And flyers, of course, get taken down probably the next day at this gentleman's club, but she still does it. That was a senseless murder there. Thomas Dejanay, a youth football coach. And then you have Joseph McNally, who was shot near the old Metro Center. He was being dragged through the street. We're not sure what led up to that interaction, but we have video of the suspect vehicle, but that's really it. So in these cases, you'll notice how senseless it is and how there really isn't much to go off. It takes witnesses to come forward, someone with the conscience to say something.
I want to talk about real quick with just watching these clips and how really artfully they're shot. Our Fox 10 investigative photojournalist, Corey Goodwin, now he did the photography for all of this and would trying to show this. Can you talk a little bit about his method where you're there with him and what you're trying to capture behind the camera that we can't necessarily get in a regular print story in a book.
I appreciate that. It's a good moment for us to shout out Corey Goodwin and Brian. You worked with him for a long time, and I think we can agree how intentional he is and how he thinks about a shot or how he approaches a location or an interview. And he always, whatever camera he has, he knows what he wants to do with it. He's not just using a tool to use it. He knows how to use that tool when it matters. So I think for something like this, we wanted to feel cinematic in a way, to have this docu-style feel where, you're following these families through their toughest times. It's not a lot of razzle-dazzle, Also want to shout out our graphics artist, Lily Kieber, upstairs helping us with those things too. But we just want it to be raw and authentic, and you can't say enough about how Corey flies that drone. It really takes you there at night or day. We want to bring you back to the scene of the crime. We also want to bring you back into the lives of these people affected. And it's a hard thing to do.
I always appreciate Corey Goodwin, no matter whether he's behind the camera or telling me his opinions on life. I mean, he's a smart, sharp guy. Tell me, do you think these families, I think probably both can be true, they hope that by talking to you, it might stir up more interest and they can get justice. But do you think it's kind of also a way to help keep their lost loved one alive somehow?
Yeah. I think it's therapeutic for them.
Yeah.
Some of these families, they do the interview with the news station or stations in the following weeks after the crime has happened. They might have a silent witness news conference, and then things may die down. An anniversary may come up. They may speak again. But after 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I mean, now they really don't get that same attention. Now the friends and family who are calling them every day aren't calling them as much because life goes on, and they're still left with the grief. They're still left with the aftermath and not knowing what's going to happen. So when we sit down with them for 45 minutes at a time, it's very therapeutic for them, and you're sort of absorbing all that heavy emotion and the tears, and it's some of the hardest interviews I've had to do.
We got about a minute left. If you can tell us, okay, tonight 5, we're going to have that, but you're also going to be following along and answering questions too, correct?
We are going to have a live premiere. So our YouTube live premiere of Aftermath season 2 will be at 5 p.m. on the dot, all 3 episodes. So hopefully you guys join us in the live chat. I'll answer any questions.